Friendship, for example, is a real gift.
It's an insane world. In it there is one sanity, the loyalty of old friends.
You're the best friends anybody ever had.
Alone, bad, friend, good.
Bubba was my best good friend. I had to make sure that he was okay.
Friendship and family, these are the things that matter.
Can we just become best friends?
Yep.
Push my friends again and I'll bind you. Thanks, Mike. You're my best friend here.
Lose one friend, lose all friends, lose yourself.
We ride together, we die together. Bad boys for life.
That's what friends are for, right?
Friends? Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
If you're not over here in 15 minutes, you can find a new best friend. You've been saying that since the 5th grade.
Welcome to the I'm Your Friend podcast. I'm your host, Aiden Licker. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm recording this episode Tuesday, the 21st, before Thanksgiving, because I'm going back to Buffalo. I'm going to be home, leaving tomorrow. I'm going to be there till Monday. So I figured I'll get a jump on the game. I was going to just be like, all right, we're going to do a week without an episode, whatever. But I decided, no, we're going to keep this going while I can, and be as consecutive as I can for the people who support me. I also know that in recent episodes, I was thinking about this today. I was like, all right, if I'm going to do an episode, what are we going to do? What are we going to talk about? It was too late to try to find a guest. Most people in the city have bounced out, at least the ones that I know by this point. So I'm like, what are we going to talk about today? So I realized in the last few episodes, there's a lot that I focus on. I don't want to say complaining or necessarily negative, but a lot of focus on like what I wish was better in the world and in our lives in general. And I think it's very easy for us to focus on what needs changing and what needs improving on. I feel like that's the mindset I'm generally always in. And I think it is the mindset of the capitalist world that you always need to be growing, right? You always need to be doing better. But for this episode, I was like, you know what? Thanksgiving's coming up. And by the time this comes out, it's going to be right after Thanksgiving. But good to still push the message. It's great to focus on what you already have and appreciate it and be grateful. There's a lot of mental health benefits, I believe, from what I've heard, from journaling with what you're grateful for and showing gratitude. And I do find that helps a lot. I try to do that every once in a while. Again, I think it's easy in this world we live in. And I know I'm a person who I feel like capitalism has just become my scapegoat for everything, but it, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, there's a link somewhere, might not be the root cause, but it's not helping. And I think it has a lot to do with why so many people feel anxious and depressed, feeling like they're not good enough. And I think it's because a lot of people sit in the same mindset that I sit in a lot of the times, which is always looking at what you need to fix in order to try to be like a perfect person, which is impossible. But it seems to be a standard that, at least on the internet, people hold, right? People want everybody to be perfect, and if you're not, they're going to come for you. They're going to virtually behead you, take you to the virtual guillotine, as we've all seen before. And obviously I'm a person who's talked about on here that we need to accept that people are flawed and we need to give people a chance to grow. But we also need to take times to look inward and show gratitude for the things we do have in our life. So I do want to focus on that for this episode. So first and foremost, super grateful to everybody who listens to this show. Even if this is the first episode you're listening to, thank you. I feel like every week I'm always astounded by the number of people that listen to me talk. And it's not a ton of people, but to me it is. I always visualize it in my head of if I was just in a room speaking and the amount of people that listen to this podcast were in that room listening to me speak, I would be very in my head and be like, why are all of you here listening to me? So very grateful for everybody who listens to this podcast and supports me and, gives me a little bit of external validation to keep going and want to keep doing this. Grateful for all the people in my life. I have so many good people in my life, and I've done a good job, I think, of just avoiding toxicity in relationships and friendships. Learned the hard way through a lot of those. And I feel like now I have a very solid support group of people around me who just like accept me for who I am no matter what. And that's awesome. Where I don't have to feel like afraid to be myself around people. And it took me a long time to get there. And that's something to be super grateful for, especially as a person who, as I've talked about in this podcast, has always felt a little outside of everybody else. I felt different growing up, and I wasn't necessarily made to feel different. I wasn't left out of things. I had friends and people liked me, and I did, get bullied from time to time, but there are people who had it way worse and who were actually made to feel different. But my thing was, I never felt like I really struggled to like feel like I connected with people, and felt like I could be myself around people. And I think that is why I am such like a late bloomer, to like finding out who I am and what I value, because I spent so long trying to like force myself into a mold that I didn't necessarily belong to. However, I'm grateful that my life wasn't necessarily very hard. I grew up with two working parents that were married that kept food on the table. We didn't necessarily always have a lot. I will say, I believe that I have a lot now. Like my parents are doing well, and I'm proud of them for that. I watched them do that. At a young age, I feel like I lived like the perfect, like American dream life. And I understand the privilege of that. And I'm grateful for that. But what I mean by it is that I remember like some of my earliest memories were in my parents' house in South Buffalo. It was a small 3-bedroom house, which I know sounds big, but it wasn't very big. And there were 5 of us, like kids in the house. And my brother and I shared a bed for 9 years, and they were very small bedrooms. And it wasn't a bad house or in a bad neighborhood. It was fine. And like I said, we had food on the table all the time. We had presents under the tree for Christmas. But I remember things being kind of tight, I remember hearing, like, as I got a little older, like I remember hearing my parents talk about budgeting and try to do the most they could for us. My parents were both people who also like always worked multiple jobs. Like my dad was a teacher and would also like bartend at places on the side. And then my mom was an x-ray tech and eventually an MRI tech. And then she was also waitressing. My mom's always been a person who's just always had a side hustle, and I think, both of them is where I kind of get my work ethic and my drive. So I'm grateful to them for that. And I'm grateful that I grew up exactly the way that I did. Rather than like if my parents like had what they have now and I was born into that, I don't think I turn out the same, I think I turn out a little bit more spoiled. And I feel lucky that I grew up in a time where like I was forced to like appreciate the value of things and understand like the value of your dollar, and like prioritizing what you should spend things on and stuff, and how to save money and how to make ends meet. Yeah, I don't know. I'm grateful I have a relationship with my brothers. We don't always all get along so well, and there was definitely a lot of hard times I remember in those relationships when I was younger, but I'm grateful to be at the place that we are now, and that I'm close with them and I get along with them, and I love those guys a lot. And my whole family. I'm grateful, there was a time for sure in like my early 20s when I was kind of like figuring it all out and figuring out who I was and stuff, where I was like very angry. I didn't know why I was angry, but I think I was angry at like the fact that I realized I felt secluded from people. And I think I rejected a lot of like my family because of that, because it felt like it was on purpose, even though none of them have like the awareness to even handle that. There's a fuck ton of us, I come from a gigantic family. And I was just very sensitive, and nobody's really paying attention to that, and that's not their fault. But during those times that I was like angry and I would like lash out at people in my family, and like that's when I kind of form very strong political opinions, and a lot of like that anger was driven into that. So I'm grateful that I've kind of gotten over that phase, and that my family has like forgiven me for that and still appreciates me for who I am and understands that I was just figuring it out. And this is exactly like what I was talking about at the beginning of this, in terms of like letting people be human. Like you have to let people figure it out, especially when they're young, dude. Like I feel like your teenage years don't really end. We need to figure out a different way to like separate groups of age, because like I feel like you're not really like a teenager. I know it technically means like 13 to 19, right? But I feel like culturally or in society, like what a teenager is, I feel like is like 16 to 25. Like that's how that works in my head. Because I feel like I was I don't know. I feel like 16, I really felt like more of an adult, and I felt like I had a good handle on things at that point. And then from there to like 25 was just like fucking up, and it was basically fucking around and finding out, it was just like making mistakes and learning from them. And then eventually like at 25, your brain fully develops, your frontal cortex or whatever fully develops, and you and at least for me, and I talk about this a lot, and I feel strongly about it because of how deeply I felt it. I also think it has a lot to do with like that I turned 25 literally the day the pandemic started in the US. But that was really the time that I was like, kind of came like, everything felt like it came full circle into like my self-awareness. Maybe not came full circle, but it felt like I hit a wall and was like, oh shit, there's some stuff going on here I have to figure out. I have to reflect on the last decade of my life and search internally and really fix some shit going on in here. And then I did that over a couple years. I guess I would say I'm grateful to people that stuck around, because I feel like I don't know, I'm always harsher on myself than I probably should be, and I always picture things in my head as worse than they are, but I feel like I was kind of a bit of a nightmare to be around in like my early 20s, because I was just so lost, and I was just like avoiding that at all costs. It's weird being like a very sensitive, emotional guy who grew up in like an Irish Catholic household, where it's like men don't talk about their feelings, and that's not to say like, what's funny is like my dad is kind of a softie, but he like doesn't show it. But my dad's not like some hard ass or anything. I mean, we do call him the General. That is like the nickname we have for him. Wasn't in the military or anything. We just call him that because he's just like stern and kind of strict, a lot of our friends were like afraid of him when we were growing up. Nobody wanted to be on his bad side, he's just a man who like demands respect, but like I feel like even saying that paints a false picture of him as if he's this Red Foreman character from that 70s show, like, because he wasn't at all. He was much more like Alan Matthews from Boy Meets World. Like, at least in my head, I felt I see my dad as a bit like softer of his guy, definitely like strict and stern, and has his values, demands respect, but not like a guy you got to walk on eggshells around or anything. He's a good person and a nice guy who would give you the shirt off his back and everything. But either way, like, not a guy who talks about his feelings all that much. And that's just how he grew up, you know, to no fault of his own. But then, you know, he makes a bunch of kids that are all dudes. A lot of testosterone in my household. Again, I don't really look at any of my brothers being like these crazy, like manly, like over masculine dudes. You know, not really I feel like, I don't know, we're all very normal guys that are very like understanding. But I do think there is this weird thing that we all have about like, we kind of like don't know how to talk about how we're feeling. This, I think, is something I might try to bring up to my brothers next, like, time we're all around each other, and just kind of like make it uncomfortable to try to see if we can get to like a new level of comfort of being like, do you guys know how to talk about how you feel? Because like I've struggled with that for a long time, and I think just how we grew up, and I think it, you know, it's like a society thing that it's just like vulnerability makes you less of a man for some reason. But I don't know, I'm a person who feels things very deeply, and I'm very sensitive, and I feel like I have to talk about these things, and I don't know, I wonder if any of them feel like that. You know, I'm sure they do. I have to imagine they do. But grateful for those guys nonetheless, you know. I can't even talk about how grateful I am about like my current situation, dude. Like, man, going from, how old was I in 2019? 24? And 2019 was like, that was like mental rock bottom for me. That was like the closest I ever got to calling it quits. Just to be perfectly honest. And it's not something I talk about a lot, but when talking about showing gratitude, I'm grateful I'm still here, and I'm grateful I made it to see the other side of this. Because, yeah, man, at 24, I was real lost, and kind of hit a point where I was like, I don't even know where to begin with all this, and I'd rather just not be around. And something kept me here. And now to be 28 and be like, I got out of my hometown, and I'm living in an apartment by myself in a really cool neighborhood, and working a job in the industry I've always wanted to work in, and being able to like pursue my passions is crazy. Looking back at like the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years to now is kind of nuts, and I'm super happy to be where I'm at. I mean, I know I've talked about this a lot, and I don't want it to sound like I'm like bragging about it, and I don't think it does, but just entirely grateful for the situation, and to like, I don't know, myself to have the courage to take a chance on myself. Something I've always been afraid to do. And I need to remind myself of that every once in a while. I think a lot about lately in terms of like masculinity, and how many guys are internally suffering because of all the things I've just mentioned. That I think I don't know about most, but definitely a ton of dudes struggle to feel like they have an outlet to be able to talk about how they feel. And I feel grateful that I was around a community in like my teenage years and 20s that was like more of an art community, this like indie alt kind of people, whatever you want to label it as, that were like much more forgiving of those things and much more understanding and much more about breaking the mold. Because as I don't know, I think about guys who didn't have that, you know, these guys who might be like jocks or, you know, these like finance bros or whatever, who I think of them specifically because there's so many in New York, and I've met a lot of them, and I kind of, I don't know, I've othered those people. That's a new term I learned about recently. Othering people. Basically, like, there's when you, it's basically like stereotyping, I suppose, but it's just like you have an image made up of something in your mind, and if somebody fits that image, you like just reject that. And that's kind of how I felt, I think, about a lot of like jocks and like guys who work in finance and like, I don't know, anything like that. And I think it's because I felt rejected by those kinds of people my whole life. So now I have othered them. But there's a lot of them in the city, and I've met a few and have recognized that about myself, that I do that, and realize that it's like, oh, these are just like everybody, as I've talked about in here before, everybody is just their experience. We don't choose what we get born into, you know, and it's like, and everybody is, this is the crazy part. If you want to get spiritual about it, everybody is doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Like, that is the plan, the path that was set out for everybody, you know? And it's like, and if you were born into that kind of life, you would turn out the same, because you'd just be on that same path, you know? I mean, you might not believe that, but there's part of me that does, I think. But I think those groups of guys are the ones who have the harder time, because they don't necessarily have the environment or the people around them to where they would feel comfortable kind of breaking those walls down, you know? And I don't know, I think about this a lot in terms of like, as we're in this new age of looking at societal norms of gender and looking at, I don't know, you know, I try to be as much of a feminist as I can, and try to look at how we got here and how men have always had the upper hand in society, and how the pendulum is starting to swing in the other direction, at least a little bit, like progress is being made, you know? But I can't help but feel a sense of, I don't know what the word is, but when like we get into the conversation of like men are trash, you know, I get the sentiment, and I don't necessarily think it's wrong, because I think there's a lot of asshole guys that just like have no interest in bettering themselves, and use their position of like, I don't know, call it patriarchal privilege, I suppose, to their advantage to like knock other people down. You know, I fully get that, but there's part of me that, I don't know, tenses up when I hear that, because I think there's this other conversation to be had at the same time to add some nuance to it, of like the emotional shortcomings, I suppose, that men have faced in society for so long, and the lack of like of a safe place to speak about that. And I think that is ultimately like what leads to men being bad in relationships. I think why so many men lack emotional intelligence is because of these kinds of things. Like, I don't know exactly. I don't have all the answers, obviously, you know, I'm just trying to figure it out along with everybody else here. But part of me feels like everything is connected between, like, I mean, you know, we all know that like patriarchy hurts us all, right? And so I think that is kind of what I mean in terms of men not having the emotional intelligence to be able to handle relationships properly, and not be able to like understand their feelings, and not be able to communicate those feelings in a healthy way, and to bottle everything up, and then leave a relationship rather than try to fix it and work on it. And, you know, I think the same goes for like being unfaithful, you know, and cheating is like, I think it's just because like they don't know, it's just the easy way out. And I don't think men are given the proper tools to be able to like look inward and like without feeling like emasculated. And I think that's like a systemic thing. This thing I've been thinking about this concept lately of almost like a don't hate the player, hate the game thing, of like don't hate the individual, hate the system. You know, like there's a system in place for a lot of different things that is the cause of these bad things that happen. And it's like, and I'm not saying don't hold people accountable. Absolutely, people need to be held accountable, but it's like, I don't think a lot of these things come from like a place of pure evil. You know, I think it comes from a system that is like manipulated us to be this way. So I don't know. I think those are the conversations that are more productive to have. You know, going back to what started this conversation with the men are trash thing, like maybe patriarchy is trash, and we try to have more conversations surrounding that. The other half of that conversation that doesn't get talked about, I mean, the emotional shortcomings of men in terms of like male suicide rates, you know, is really what gets me thinking about these things on a deeper level of like that all has to be connected somehow. I don't know. I'm not sitting here trying to be some sort of like, I don't know, meninist or whatever these fucking incels want to call themselves, but I just think there's a deeper conversation to be had regarding these issues. And I know it might sound ridiculous coming from me, a straight white man. Anyway, I'm grateful to be a man of emotional intelligence and awareness that I think I was only brought to because of like painful things that I went through. To have the emotional intelligence that I have, a man with emotional intelligence, and have the awareness that I do for those things, especially as I reflect on my early 20s. And, you know, I don't think I was necessarily like treated people horribly, but I definitely didn't treat them as well as I wish I would have. And I think I've definitely hurt people and have used people and all, you know, because I couldn't figure out how to do anything within, you know, the confines of a relationship. And again, grateful that I was able to figure that out and kind of come out on the other side and now have the relationship that I do. And feel very secure in that and healthy and know how to communicate properly and know to work on things when they get hard rather than just leave. This is not going to be a very long episode because I just wanted to do it quick to get it out. But I hope everybody has had a good and safe Thanksgiving and that you haven't fought with your family members too much. I don't think I will. I've gotten over that phase of my life, as I mentioned before. I feel like I might, it depends who's around, but I feel like I might try to get provoked, and I can't wait to just, I'm in such a good place mentally, dog, that like I don't even care about arguing anymore. So it's just like, I'm just going to be sitting there eating my, whatever my vegan food is that I'm going to be eating. And if a family member's like, says some shit about what's going on in the Middle East, I'm like, psh, didn't hear you, dog. I'm eating cranberry sauce out of a can, you know, and just keep living my life. It's the way to go. Again, I'm very grateful for everybody who listens to this, and I'm going to keep going because of all of you who listen. And that's all I got to say, I think. Keep it a short one, you know? See you next week.